Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Audit, Governance and Oversight Committee meeting today. I'm Ben Nutland. I'm the chair of this committee and the vice chair of the Avon Fire Authority. Amanda, do we have any apologies for absence?
We do. We have apologies from Councillors Stansfield and Goggin, but we are missing a couple of councillors this morning, so Councillors Mohammed, Williams and Wilcox, but I know there have been some travel issues due to the weather this morning, so I'm sure they'll join us when we can. I can confirm that we are quorate.
Thank you, Amanda. On to the emergency evacuation procedures. So, Steve, can you take us through that?
Yeah, members, there's nothing scheduled today by way of testing the alarms, but so if one should go off, then if you follow me out of one of the exits, I'll try and get you to a dry place to muster. Okay.
Okay, so item 3, declarations of interest. Anyone? No? Item 4, public access. Amanda?
None received.
Okay, item 5, Chair's business. So welcome everyone to the meeting, especially our newer members, if this is your first meeting. I can confirm that this committee meeting is taking place at headquarters in Portishead. We are recording the meeting for the public to view on the Avon Fire Authority YouTube channel. I'm going to start by introducing myself, and after which we'll then go around to the members to introduce themselves. So once again, my name is Ben Nutland. I'm the Vice Chair of the Avon Fire Authority, and I am from South Gloucestershire. Richard?
And Richard Tucker, North Somerset Council, Weston-super-Mare, Milton Ward.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Matthew Riddle, South Gloucestershire Council.
Good morning, everyone. Andrew Varney, Brislington West, Bristol City Council.
Thank you. I'm going to now ask the officers to introduce themselves. So if we start with Amanda to my left.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Amanda Brown. I'm the clerk to Avon Fire Authority.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Verity Lee, Statutory Finance Officer.
And good morning. I'm Simon Flood. I'm the Performance Manager for Avon Fire and Rescue.
Good morning. I'm Caroline Taylor. I'm the Head of Corporate Assurance, Continuous Improvement and Planning.
Good morning. Claire Bentley, Head of Finance.
Good morning, Steve Imrie, one of the Assistant Chiefs for Avon Fire.
Thank you. I'm aware that we have 2 outside representatives today, so if you're okay to introduce yourselves as well, is that okay?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ian Howes. I'm a partner in Deloitte and standing in for Michelle Hopton, who leads the external audit.
Morning, everyone. I'm Callum Keating. I'm an audit manager at Deloitte.
Morning, everyone. Vicky Gould, internal audit from RSM.
That's great, thank you. Okay, just to remind attendees to put their phones onto silent, please, while you're in the meeting. And to remind you that when you do speak, if you can notify me if you want to speak by just raising your hand, and to use your microphone when you do speak, which everyone's done so far, so well done. Just a little bit of news that some of you will be aware that the Vice Chair of this committee, Councillor Paul Goggin, is unfortunately not very well at the moment. Obviously, hopefully I can speak for all members on this committee that we send him our best wishes and hope for a speedy recovery soon. In terms of how we will vote today, I'm going to advise you that I will take any votes against first, any abstentions, and then votes for. And I'm now going to pass over to Amanda.
Thank you, Chair. So members, this is just a reminder that we sent out an invitation to all elected members to complete the Equality and Dignity in the Workplace e-learning package. So that was sent to you by email on the 17th of August. This is entirely voluntary training, so you don't have to do it, but we think it would be good if you did. The chair of the Old People and Culture Committee did it first and thoroughly recommended it for all members. So if you can complete it, then if you could just inform Emma, the Dem Services clerk, that you've done so, and let us have any feedback on the contents, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Steve to update us on a question that a member asked at the last meeting regarding PPE. So, Steve, are you okay to run us through that quickly?
Yeah, okay, Chair. I've got a little bit of an update provided by ACFO Welsh, who leads in this area. Following By way of background, preceding that meeting, the last AJOC, the in-service uniform working group met, and an issue was raised regarding that national issue with PPE. That led Richard to raise the corporate risk on the corporate risk register due to whether or not there be sufficient PPE for staff should there be a turnover following incidents and decontamination. Following that corporate risk being raised, there was a number of discussions had both internally and with our external suppliers about the reasons for the shortage and also what could be done about it. By and main, the national shortage from our perspective was due to a relocation of our supplier from this country to Poland, and that created a bit of a knock-on effect. That said, the supplies team working with MSA, our supplier, we managed to uplift our stock in central stores, so should the immediate need for PPE be required internally, we've got an enhanced amount of stock in our central stores, which can then be backfilled, if you like, by the main supplier in appropriate time. So because we've got those measures in place now, the corporate risk was subsequently reduced back to the original level.
Thank you, Steve. Item 6, the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Audit, Governance and Oversight Committee held on the 27th of June. I'm going to move. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Varney? Okay. Any votes against? Any abstentions? Votes for.
If we just have a moment to pause. We've got Councillor Mohammed's just joined us. Thank you.
Councillor Riddle.
Just to explain, I wasn't here on that meeting, so I didn't vote.
Okay, item 7, adjustments to the final statement of accounts 21-22 and the external audit plan for 22-23. Verity, can you take us through that?
Thank you, Chair. So yes, I'm going to talk you through paper 7, which is on page 15 of your packs. So this paper is going to run through the current status of both the statement of accounts for the year ended March 2022 and also the year ended March 2023 and the associated external audit as well. What I'm going to do is run through the key points in the paper, and then I'm going to hand over to Deloitte, who can add anything to any of the topics I've covered, and then also they're going to run you through Appendix 2, which is the external audit plan for the audit that's due to start in the next couple of months. So this paper has got 5 recommendations. I'm going to talk through sections of the paper and then kind of refer back to the recommendations for you. So by way of background, at the meeting of this committee, the last meeting of this committee, so in June, the draft statement of accounts for the year ended March 2023 were approved to be published for public inspection. So that happened on the 28th of June. The draft statement of accounts were published, and that signalled the start of the 30 working day inspection period. We received a number of queries and questions from members of the public, which we have addressed within that time period. There was one query that was directed to Deloitte, and we've been working with Deloitte over the past few weeks to kind of address those queries. So those queries came in mainly relating to property, plant and equipment figures within the accounts. So if I can draw your attention to paragraph 5.1 and within section 5. So 5.1 shows the 4 key areas that we've been investigating as part of that query that was raised by the member of the public. So our investigation has found some areas where we need to make amendments to those accounts. So fortunately, we will be able to correct those as a result of this process and the fact that the accounts hadn't yet been signed for the year ended March 2022. So the first 2 points, A and B, within there are adjustments that will affect the property, plant and equipment numbers within the accounts, and then the second 2 are more around affecting the revaluation reserve, so the unusable reserves associated with the properties that we hold. By way of an update, since this paper was published, we have now finished our work on those adjustments, and earlier this week they were forwarded over to Deloitte for their review. So our plan is to get Deloitte sign off on those adjustments before we process them through the statement of accounts. To give a bit of an understanding of the process that we've had to go through, it's been quite a lengthy process to investigate these issues. So we've had to go back through. We use a system called RAM, which is an asset management software. What we've had to do is restore a backup from this system from a number of years ago, and then subsequently reprocess every transaction since that backup was restored, to weed out some errors that had kind of almost like created a bug in the system and kind of created issues with the revaluation reserve values and things like that. So that's been quite a lengthy process. We have finished that now. But we didn't want to rush that process. We wanted to make sure we get these things right, because obviously it has resulted in misstatements that we needed to correct. So there are 4 areas that we've been investigating. There are some corrections that are going to be made, and they will be reflected in the March 2022 account. So just to clarify, the public inspection period was for the year ended March 2023, and the queries were relating to the year ended March 2023. But actually, when we investigated these issues, it meant that we needed to make changes to the prior year accounts as well. Paragraph 5.6 of your paper details where there are going to be some adjustments to the year ended March 2023 as well. So as a result of the changes to the March 22 accounts, we will be updating opening balances. So anything that had changed in the year ended March 2022 will automatically affect the subsequent statement of accounts. And then there are a couple of areas outlined there that we will be looking at. So revaluing the Avon station and just disposing of the old station as part of kind of closing off that process. So that leads me on to the first recommendation of this report. So back in section 2, the first recommendation is just to note the work that's been ongoing to address these queries and to kind of make the corrections to both statements of account for 21-22 and 22-23. If I move on to paragraph 5.3, members might recall that the March 22 statement of accounts had not yet been signed because we had delays around the LGPS pension valuation. So those pension valuations came in and we updated the accounts for those, and the audit work is almost complete on those. So my understanding is that the pension audit is complete. It's back with our external audit team to review that work. But there is one outstanding query with Mercer, which is the actuary of the scheme. So we're waiting for that to be clarified as well. So that piece of work is still ongoing. And in conjunction with the work we're now doing and the amendments we're going to make, there are 2 items there that are being finalised before we can sign off those final statement of accounts for the year ended March 2022. So then that brings me to recommendation B of this paper, which is to recommend that once we've made the associated amendments and the pension audit work is complete, that those final accounts are presented to the chair of the Fire Authority and the chair of this committee for approval and signing. I will move on to paragraph 5.4 of this paper, which is just mentioning the letter of representation. So part of the audit evidence that Deloitte will be collecting to be able to sign off those accounts for the year ended March 2022 is the letter of representation, which is something that we have to sign to give additional assurances around timeliness and completeness, not timeliness, accuracy and completeness of the work or the information that we have provided. So that brings me on to the third recommendation of this paper, which is just to approve that letter of representation for signing in conjunction with those final accounts once the adjustments have been made. Paragraph 5.7 covers the external audit plan, which I'll leave to our colleagues at Deloitte to talk through in more detail. But the key point there that I wanted to raise was around the start date of that audit. And it's something that was mentioned in the meeting of this committee last time. That audit is planned to begin on the 30th of October. We have a statutory requirement to publish our audited signed final accounts by the end of September. So obviously the audit timelines are not going to allow us to do that. So I just wanted to draw attention to that, and then that leads us on to the final 2 recommendations of this paper. The 4th one to approve the external audit plan, and then the 5th one to approve the publication of that draft statement, that draft statutory notice, which is at Appendix 3 to this paper. And then the final point I just wanted to raise is in paragraph 4.2. We'd previously talked about the additional fees incurred as a result of the audit for the year ended March 2022. And I mentioned during the last meeting that we were working with Deloitte to kind of come to an agreement on what that fee might be. We haven't been able to get to that point, so that's been referred to the PSAA, and it's in the process of going through their fee determination process. We haven't heard anything yet, but on submission we were told we should hear something towards the end of October or end of September or early October. So hopefully in the coming weeks we'll have a decision on that as well. So just to provide an update on the situation there. I think they were the key points that I wanted to bring out from this paper, and then I'm happy to hand over to Deloitte to add anything more and run through their audit plan in any more detail.
Thank you, Verity. Thank you. I think that was very comprehensive. Just one point from us, the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noted that in our letter of representation we referred to Avon Fire and Rescue Authority, which I believe should be Avon Fire Authority, so we'll get that amended when you send it over to us on your headed paper. So just to clarify that for members. Otherwise, as Verity said, we're mainly waiting for information from Mercer in relation to the pension fund to complete that and to go through the amendments that have been made in relation to assets. That should close out 21-22, get that signed off, and then we can move on to 22-23, as Verity said. In line with most local government and fire and rescue, etc., across the country, there are huge delays. I mean, I'm still working on 19-20 audit for a council, there are 18-19 audits open, so whilst I understand members' frustration of the delay here, it is actually very small compared to many places across the country, with a huge issue around public sector audit, the resources available to complete those audits. The National Audit Office and others are working to try and find a solution to this, because even if you can deal with the current backlog, it could reoccur unless something is done to change the system. So there's a lot going on. I'm very positive about the latest movements on that from the NAO, and hopefully this is something that, you know, once we get caught up, shouldn't reoccur if these things come through, but there is a lot of pressure in the system. So just to reassure members that there's nothing unusual about the delay. In fact, as I say, you're probably well ahead of many authorities in terms of getting the audit done, and we look forward to completing that, and work is due to start in October. And on that note, I'll come on to the audit plan. Many members will have seen these in previous years, which outline the work that we will undertake. What we set out in the plan is the significant risks as we determine those, and that's the significant risks for the audit. They're not necessarily what you would describe as significant risks in your risk register. We are focused purely on the audit. And what we mean by that is these are the areas where we will spend most of our audit resource and time looking at those areas, because they're most likely to result in an error in the accounts or a misstatement in the accounts. Those have been identified as management override, which is assumed to be a significant risk in every audit, in any sector, in a company, in the council, in fire. It doesn't make any difference. It's in all of those audits. We assume that, and you can't rebut it. You can't sort of say, well, no, actually, this authority is brilliant. We're not going to have that one. It will be in every audit. And what that's looking at is any opportunity for management to say, manipulate the accounts, make an estimate, and sort of go on the overly prudent or the overly optimistic side of things. Is looking at all of those things in terms of stating the accounts. So we'll do work around that. The other area we've picked up is capital expenditure. You'll have seen from the paper that's just come. It's a complex area. What is capital? What is revenue? What gets put into the accounts, and then the impact of that on valuation. So again, capital expenditure is an area where we will focus as we move forward. We've also identified two areas of audit focus, so they're not significant risk, but we'll spend quite a bit of time looking at those as well. The first is around property valuations, again linked to the capital expenditure and some of the issues that have occurred in the past. And the other is the pension liability valuation. It's a huge number in the accounts. There's an awful lot of assumptions go into coming up with that number that the actuaries look at. We need to look at whether those are reasonable assumptions or whether they've been overly aggressive or overly optimistic on those assumptions, and come to a conclusion as to whether the number presents fairly the sort of position that, or gives a true and fair view of the position on the pension fund at that point in time. As members will know, that number goes up and down by huge amounts, just depending on maybe an assumption around mortality rates. Certainly COVID changed some of the assumptions around mortality rates, and that impacted on some of the liabilities that were there. interest rates, and all of those things can impact on the number. So it does move up and down significantly. It is trying to predict a sort of future number. So there's a lot of assumptions in that, and we spend quite a bit of time making sure that it's a reasonable number. So those are the key areas in terms of what we'll be looking at. We set out in the paper our materiality. So that's a number that if there was an error bigger than that, we'd say that would really be misleading. We've calculated that number to be 1.6 million. Now, some of you might say that's an awful lot, you know, but we're looking at the overall numbers in the accounts, the big numbers in terms of asset valuation, the expenditure levels, and an error bigger than that, we think, would give the reader of the accounts the wrong impression. However, what we set is what we call a clearly trivial level, and anything above that that we identify, we will report to you. Anything below that, we'll just discuss with management because we consider it to be clearly trivial. It might be a small error, maybe an assumption has been made and there's a slight adjustment to that because we've got later information when we've completed the work than when they did the accounts because of time. And if it's below that level, we won't report it to you. If it's above that level, we'll tell you about it. So that's materiality. It's calculated on a percentage of expenditure as in most local government audits or most audits of this nature. The next page, which is page 7 of our report, I can't quite see which page of the pack it is, but just covers the key areas of our audit, the financial statements, the annual governance statement, and the value for money. So we audit the financial statements. I talked quite a bit about the risks to that. We audit the annual governance statement to make sure it's a reasonable reflection of the governance arrangements in place. And we look at the arrangements to secure value for money. We don't sort of do detailed numbers analysis or sort of how much do you spend on this compared to anything. But what we are looking at is the arrangements to make sure you're aware of those things, the sort of performance information that you get, and make sure you've got appropriate arrangements for that. Beyond that, there's quite a bit of detail there which tells you about those significant risks and the work that we will do in those areas. I don't propose to repeat that for you, and hope you've had a chance to read that. You will see on our fee estimate, we outline the fees that were charged for the previous year, including the bit which is in discussion with PSAA. I think our report notes that we're still discussing it with management. We've moved beyond that now, so our report is slightly out of date on that point, which is on page 25 of our report. And that's with PSAA to determine. Other than that, we've set out the fees for the current year, which obviously, because of the lack of overrun, there is a much lower number, although it does include some adjustments for new accounting and auditing standards that are coming in place, and you will see in the report some of the detail around those, but they do require us to do more work than we would have done in the past. Final thing in there is our responsibilities in relation to fraud. Obviously, we are not here just to find fraud, but we have awareness of issues that could be indicative of fraud when we're doing our audit, and that sets out what we're doing, and we report in our audit opinion what we've done in relation to fraud as well. Again, that standard is nothing specific to you. It's not indicating there's a greater fraud risk here. It's just outlining our responsibilities. So quite a bit there, it's quite a long report. Just wanted to give you the highlights. I'm happy to take any questions you might have on that, or indeed any questions about the plans to get the audit complete, which Callum can cover.
Yeah. Andrew?
Thank you. Sorry, a question for Verity, actually. So, Verity, about the PSAA process, is that a binding decision once they've made their decision on fees? Is that something that both sides agree to accept?
I think that's my understanding. Yeah, I think once they've done their work, they determine an appropriate fee. I think we do have to agree, but I think the general kind of accepted behaviour is that we would both agree that because they've done the work to determine that that's an appropriate value.
Okay, thank you very much. And also regarding the bug in the system that affected the valuations, has that been permanently fixed? Do you know?
Yes. So it was, I think a depreciation run had been processed twice, which caused some sort of error in the system in a past year. So that's all been stripped out now, and everything has been processed accurately from that point in time forwards.
Fantastic, thank you.
Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested in the valuation of the property assets. Obviously, we want an accurate figure on that, but would we necessarily value our assets every year? Because I suspect that that's quite a a process in itself and quite expensive in resources. So I'm just interested to know about the valuation process of property, and also, is there a link or is it completely separate about in terms of knowing the rebuild value for insurance purposes? Are there two different processes in effect for that? Thank you.
So I think the first point around property valuations, SIP for guidance would say you have to do at least once every 5 years, a full valuation. So you'd get an expert to come out and value those properties physically, so physically visit them, unless anything has happened that suggests that there might be a material change, in which case you should do it more frequently. We would abide by the SIP for guidance in that respect. In interim years, sometimes we would get the valuers to do a desktop exercise. So rather than physically going, they would still complete a valuation exercise, but they wouldn't have physically gone to visit the sites. In terms of insurance, I think it is a separate exercise, but I've not been involved in the insurance, so I don't know if there's anyone. I think it's a separate exercise because the valuation is more for the purposes of accounts valuation rather than rebuild.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to go to Councillor Mohammed and then we're going to go to Caroline.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, that's it. Yeah. Councillor Mohammed.
Thank you. I got two questions. The first one is what stands for RAM, and the second question is, so you said here about 5.1, page 17D, you said you continue to investigate adjustments and service will be made as required. So how big is historic adjustment?
I think so. To address your first question, RAM is our asset management software. I think it's real asset management, just check I get it right. So that's the asset management software we use outside of our general ledger accounting software to manage the properties that we hold and the asset register there. And then in terms of the final point there, 5.1, the final sentence against point D, actually further investigation on that point, which hadn't been done at the time that these papers were published, there's not going to be an adjustment in respect to the Nova Way site, because actually that bug in the system that I talked about, it was the one that kind of resulted in the revaluation reserve on this site looking funny, which is why we were looking at it. So it looks like the cost and the revaluation reserve were very similar, which would suggest that it had no initial cost. It had been revalued. It had been continually valued, so its book value is very close to its revaluation reserve. In actual fact, once this system and the corrections have gone through, that's not the case, and there's a significant enough difference, and the initial cost is looking around the 2 million mark, maybe slightly more, which is in line with our expectation for that site. So actually, there's not going to be an adjustment in relation to that final point there, but we were still investigating it at the time that these papers were published.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members? No? Okay, I have a question. So this is to Ian. Obviously, in your speech, you spoke about asset valuations, looking at big errors and small errors. One of the things that did crop up when I read the report was that Deloitte picked up the mistake by our side in terms of the valuation of the Avon Mouth fire station, but then it failed to audit the correction of that error. I'm just wondering how that managed to get through.
So I think we picked up that what you had done was you'd revalued it before it had come into action. You shouldn't have done that. You should carry it at cost until the point it comes into use, which will actually be in 22-23. And we've agreed with Verity that actually a valuation will be put on it. That will probably result in a write-down of the value, usually does when these things are valued, because to pick up on Councillor Riddle's question, the valuation method is not about what you could sell it for. It's about a modern equivalent asset valuation, and quite often that's different to the cost. So that's what happened. I'm not sure about the final part of your question, sorry. So
I think you're right. I think it got picked up. We'd revalued an asset under construction that we shouldn't have done. We should have been holding it at cost. And I think when we corrected that, we didn't reverse the revaluation. I think it got moved into land and buildings incorrectly. It obviously needed to be reversed. And I think Ben's question is more around how that correction, that incorrect correction, passed through the audit process.
I'm afraid I don't know the detail, but I would imagine it's quite a complex thing to unpick, and we probably just have not followed that through. Obviously, we hadn't signed the opinion at that point, and it's been picked up through the process. So, thankfully, we hadn't got to a point where it was closed out and final checks hadn't been done. So, hopefully, it would have been picked up in those final checks before we signed anyway.
Yeah, it's just pure curiosity on my part, because obviously it is a large sum. Obviously, Deloitte do hundreds of millions, billions in terms of overall, business each year. But in terms of a sum of 2.4 million, in terms of what we're talking about here, I would have thought that would have got picked up sooner in terms of the, what am I trying to say? In terms of it sort of slipped by without too many people noticing, and that was the kind of worrying part for me.
Yeah, I understand the question. I suppose the point I'm making is we hadn't actually finished the audit. We haven't signed it. There are lots of checks that go on at the final stage when we get the final version of the accounts with all of the corrections that I would have expected to then pick those things up. We hadn't actually got to that point when the questions came in and we started to unpick the issues, and that uncovered it at that point in time. I would hope that our final checks would have picked it up as well. So you're right, but it was more about a timing issue, I believe, than actually us not having completed the work.
I suppose it's worth saying for the benefit of members that we are grateful to the member of the public for spotting that error, because it was quite a significant one. So thank you to that member of the public, and we have taken that seriously, and the work has been done or is in the process of being finalised.
Thank you, everyone. Before we move on, I will just obviously give my personal thanks to the member of the public that did pick this up. Obviously, these things were brought to the attention to the officers, and actually it just shows what a good team that we do have here is that they were picked up, and then we were able to go through it piece by piece. And we can rectify this now going forward so that we have an as accurate as possible statement in terms of where we are. But huge thanks to Verity and all the work that she's done on this, because I know it has been a massive amount of work. Okay, so we're going to go on to the... oh no, we need to review this, don't we? There we go. Yeah, okay, so what I'm going to do, there are 5 separate recommendations, so I'm going to break these up. So if everyone is happy, we're going to take some on block and some as they come. So just to check, everyone's happy with that process? Okay, so the first recommendation is to note the current work being completed in response to the points raised at the part of the public inspection period. So, happy with that? Yep. B, to recommend that the final 21-22 statement of accounts, once amended for any required adjustments as discussed further in section 5, be presented to the Avon Fire Authority Chair and Chair of AGOT for approval and sign-in. Everyone happy with that? Okay, and then we're going to take C, D and E on block. So I'm going to ask for any votes against. Any abstentions? Votes for. That's great, thank you. Okay, on to item 8, which is the internal audit progress report, which is going to be RSM, so Vicky Gold. Yeah, Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll take you through our progress report. So section 1 sets out the key messages. So we've issued 2 draft internal audit reports since the last meeting. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to finalise these quite yet. We're still working with service management to make sure that we bring mutually approved final reports to you. We don't bring draft reports until everybody's content with the content. So we'll bring those to the next meeting. We've also undertaken some action tracking, which I'll go through in a second, but section 2 sets out the internal audit plan and the revised timings in terms of delivery. So we've got the health and safety, contaminant, cybersecurity coming to the next meeting, as well as the key financial controls audit, which we scoped yesterday, which is looking at payroll, payments to staff, so payroll, controls and expenses. And then in the new year, we're looking at absence management or some aspect of HR and prevention. So that will flow through to the March meeting. So section 3, we've sets out our sector briefings, which again I'll go through in a second, but I'll follow up. So this is a new approach this year. So we used to take all of the internal audit actions that were raised in the previous year and follow them up in quarter 4 to validate that the progress reported through Caroline every other meeting is, so to validate that and make sure that the action taken has addressed the risk that we originally identified. But we decided that it would be more valuable, seeing as you get those reports throughout the year, for us to work with Caroline and the team to validate that as the year goes on. So you'll see in pages 71 of the pack and 72 that we've worked with management to look at the previous health and safety, injury management and operational assurance actions. And we've been able to validate, verify the closure of 5 of those actions, and we'll continue to work with management on the rest of those and other actions that fall due and are closed between now and the next meeting, when you'll get a full report from Caroline and the team. So that's just an update to show that we're continuously looking at that and making sure that you're getting an even flow of assurance on the closure of these actions throughout the year. Then on to our emergency services sector briefings. This is something that RSN's technical team pulled together. We look at the things that are going on across the sector and pull this paper together for your information. And on page 78 of the pack, you'll see the fire section around NFCC, evidence-based risk assessments, rigorous checks for fire and rescue employees, culture action plan, and there's just things on there that says considerations for audit committees to make sure that you've got assurance in these areas that you're talking about at other meetings, and just to flag to you around things such as fire standards, the new professional standards, etc. So that's for information for your bedtime reading, if you will. And then the second section is around police and fire, so around the emergency services network. And RSM, we collate across all of our clients, we pull their risk registers together and we collate a benchmarking report just to analyse and understand all the different risks that organisations across the country are putting on their strategic risk registers. And this sets out some of that information and can help you, both management and the committee, kind of benchmark where you are. And it just helps as a kind of check and challenge. You know, are we considering the same things? Is there something we're not thinking about? Are other fire services having different risks and issues to us? So that, again, that's just for information purposes. And I will stop there and take any questions.
Thank you, Vicky. Any questions from members? Councillor Tucker?
Just a quick one, actually, Ben. In terms of the last comment, actually, in terms of benchmarking with other authorities, do you find that much comes out of that dialogue from time to time? Are there kind of, I wouldn't say major surprises, but certain issues that you kind of sometimes think perhaps we could have delved into that earlier, or
I'd actually say
aware of?
We do have conversations around benchmarking a lot of the individual audits as well, and actually the fire sector is sometimes quite behind other public sectors, and we tend to see that Avon Fire is ahead of most of our other clients. So we don't often see that there's something that our other clients are, you know, dealing with or addressing that isn't on your radar and that you're not already looking at. So that is quite a positive thing. We don't often, and Caroline can confirm, we don't often come to you and say, oh, you haven't got a handle on this, and all of our other clients have. So yeah, that's quite positive.
Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you, Vicky. So that's just to note that report, okay? Okay, item 9 is the corporate risk register. Caroline?
Thank you, Chair, and morning, members. I'd like to present this paper for consideration and noting. There are the 2 recommendations, which is to review the corporate risk register in respect of the risks in this report and consider the controls and mitigations in place to manage these risks. And the other recommendation is to consider whether the committee needs any further information to be assured the appropriate management of these corporate risks. The corporate risk register itself is subject to regular review by the senior leadership team, and it's presented to this committee 4 times a year, twice a year as an exception report and twice a year with the full corporate risk register presented. Today, the actual full corporate risk register is being presented to members. Each corporate risk is regularly reviewed and evaluated by the risk owner, who will take account of the current risk environment, the control measures in place and the planned mitigations to manage risks, after which the determination of the likelihood and the impact of the risks will be made. There's also a regular schedule of corporate risks that are examined in more detail by the senior leadership team, known as deep dives, to ensure we do more detailed scrutiny and challenge that takes place on all those risks throughout the year. The Service Leadership Board will review the highest level and newly emerging risks at their regular meetings, and in addition the Treasurer undertakes a review of the corporate financial risks to provide additional assurance. So if I can start by asking members to turn to Appendix 1, which is on page 90 of your packs. This provides members with a visual of our 18 risks on our corporate risk register and their current risk ratings. As you will see from looking at this matrix, there are no corporate risks that currently sit in any of those red risk rating boxes. With the majority of our corporate risks sitting in amber or yellow, and we've got one risk sat in one of the green boxes. So I think that just allows a quick overview of where we are in terms of our risk scoring. If I can ask members to turn to page 91 of your committee papers and direct you to look at the Appendix 2, you'll see a summary of the changes to the corporate risk scores since I last provided an update to this committee in June. The table there highlights the risks where there has been changes. As you will see, control and mobilising, the risk score has gone up since May. It's gone up to 20. This is due to the need to recruit some IT subject matter expertise to support the upgrade of the ISDN PTSN circuits by 2025 and the service telephony infrastructure. CR12, cybersecurity, the risk score was reduced from 20 to 13 during a service leadership deep dive in July, where we looked at this risk in detail, and this is to reflect the update of ICT security tools and improvements in the controls in place. CR13, loss of IT systems general, the risk score is reduced from 16 to 8 during, again, another deep dive with the service leadership team in July, where we have new servers and business continuity plans. Our CR15, which is our pensions, has also reduced since the last update to the committee. It's reduced from 20 to 18. This is due to us sort of effectively managing this risk and the issues, and us understanding more about the complexity with the legislation progressing in this area and how, as we move forward to a remedy in terms of pensions. And finally, CR16, which is health, safety and wellbeing, there's been a reduction in the score from 20 to 18, and as Steve outlaid at the start of the meeting, this is to do with the issues around the PPE supply having now been addressed. There's been no new risks added or deleted to the corporate risk register either since the last meeting. So there's an update in terms of changes since we last gave you an update. And finally, if I can ask you to turn to Appendix 3 on page 92. Members will see that you've now got a copy there of the full risk register. This is as of the 30th of August, when it was approved by our senior leadership team at the meeting. You can find full details here for all the corporate risks in terms of their scores, the controls in place and the planned mitigations and the latest supporting commentary. I'd also ask you to note another amendment's been made. So for each corporate risk, a trend line's now been added under the risk score table, which shows the risk score's direction of travel since January 2022. So hopefully, again, you might find that a useful aid in terms of understanding how that risk is moving, whether it's a risk that's sort of increasing, decreasing, staying the same, and that might pose some questions around why that is. So hopefully that's a helpful addition as well. And finally, on Appendix 4, which is page 116, this just provides members with the risk matrix and definitions for your reference to be able to help understand the corporate risk register. So that concludes my presentation. Any questions?
Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Caroline. Just regarding the planned score figures, is there a date for that, or is it just some arbitrary future point in time, or is it a consistent date?
It's a consistent date.
So what is that date for the planned
No,
score?
I mean in terms of there's not a date. It's consistent in terms of that's where we believe we should be able to get that risk level score to.
But we don't know at what point in time we'll get to that.
No, there's
level.
not been a set date for that. But it's a good question and it's something to consider. We are actually looking to review our risk strategy in the next few months, and I will make sure that's included as a question for consideration because it's not one that's been asked before, but I will consult and get some advice and guidance on whether that would be a good thing to do or whether it should remain as a standing score.
Thank you. Could I just ask about a couple of corporate risks in particular? So CR06 on control and mobilising. So that's increased from 18 to 20 because of the need to recruit some IT expertise. Do you know how that recruitment process is going? Are we likely to recruit a person with that expertise so we can reduce that risk?
So this isn't my area of specialism. I don't know if Steve's, I know he's had dealings in terms of CR06 and conversations, haven't you, with Catherine around this particular risk, so he might be a better place to answer.
Yeah, so the recruitment of an IT manager or an ICT specialist in general has been an ongoing issue that members would be aware, certainly those members that have been on the Fire Authority for over a year or so. And it's moved in different departments within the organisation. We're still, Angie Feeney, the Director of Corporate Services, is still working on what a job description, an advert, and appropriate terms and conditions would be to try and fill that position. So that's a wider organisational challenge that Angie's facing at the moment. In relation specifically to this risk and what we're trying to do, we currently have contact points in other services who have those specialists and technical expertise in place to try and assist us in the interim to get a foothold, if you like, on this, as you can tell by the trend line, this slightly increasing risk as we move forward. So, yeah, work is ongoing in that area. I've got a meeting on Friday with a colleague from Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service to try and see if we can collaborate in some way with the expertise that they have in the interim.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, just about corporate risk number 15 regarding pensions. I was disappointed to see that the planned score remains the same as the current score. So it's currently 18. The planned score is also 18. I was a bit surprised because obviously the government is issuing its immediate detriment information, its remedy information. So surely we should have a planned score that's lower than it currently is as the risk reduces once we have that legislation from the government.
I could help with that if there's the new legislation doesn't come in until the 1st of October, so obviously we're too soon at this meeting. So the Policy and Resources Committee has a responsibility as scheme manager, so your local pension board reports go to PRC, not AJOG. And what we've included for the next meeting is a verbal update on, yes, the legislation has now been passed. It will be implemented by our pension administrators from the 1st of October to process those immediate detriment cases. And then we will give you a formal report at the December PRC meeting, which will formally say, right, since the legislation came in on the 1st of October, this is how many cases we've managed to process, and this is how the implementation of that legislation is going. So it's just a bit too early at this stage. I appreciate the score levels should come down, but I think this is probably being a bit more cautious about it as the legislation isn't even being implemented until the 1st of October. I don't know if that helps at all.
I can also just add to that this particular risk did go to SLT as a deep dive last month and was discussed and looked at in detail and thoroughly reviewed, so that was the consensus at that time. But yes, I've made a note of your point in terms of making sure that is carefully considered at the next update.
Okay, Matthew, got a question?
Thank you, Ben. It's more of a statement, really. I'm very pleased to see that CR12 and CR13 scores have been reduced. But I would urge caution on these because not a week goes by when you hear of some public body getting caught out with cyber attacks, and I know in the private sector as well, there's big problems with cyber attacks. So good news, but don't rest on your laurels.
Just to add, we will obviously have the audit on cybersecurity come into this committee in December. So I think that will be useful to see those findings and look at that risk in correlation with it.
Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in terms of the risk definition likelihoods, the percentage thresholds in terms of probabilities, are they set nationally, or do we have any local autonomy on varying those at all? Or?
It's up to us which ones we adopt. We've gone with sort of generic ones nationally, but they don't necessarily actually fit that well with our fire service. And again, it's an area we are going to be looking at as part of this review of our strategy. And we've already highlighted, we're going to look at those risk definitions and whether those percentages are right, and we will be reviewing that as part of that piece of work. Yes.
Okay, any more questions for Caroline? Yep.
I want to just said the colleague. Steve, you just mentioned about the risk score increases with the CR06, and you made some progress, but what's the time scale to improve lack of the IT managerial routine? Thank you.
From a organisational perspective, the timescale is becoming more and more important. The longer we go without an IT specialist, considering how we have transitioned over to Office 365 and had a big investment in our IT upgrade, it's becoming more of a concern corporately. So a lot of work's being done, like I said, by the Director of Corporate Services on how that can be rectified. In relation to CR06, there is again, an increased importance because we have a deadline of 2025 in relation to that transition across from the ISD, the TSN system over to the SIP Trunks digital system. So that if progress isn't made in this next quarter in relation to the technical expertise that we can access through collaboration and partnership working, then I expect that corporate risk to increase again towards the start of Q4 next year. Because it is a very diminishing timeline in the context of CR06. But there's other aspects to CR06, so the command and control aspect that we can separate out from the rest of the service telecoms network. So we focus purely on the command and control aspect in relation to what we can achieve in a diminishing timeline. So there's a number of factors to it. Does that answer your question?
Okay, I will just say that actually to sum up, actually, you know, our high risks have actually disappeared now. They've gone down, obviously, due to mitigation from the SLT team. So actually, compared to where we were, we're in a much better place now, but obviously we can never rest on our laurels, and actually the work that Caroline, Steve, Simon, everyone is doing towards actually keeping this risk register as low risk as possible is actually, you can see that trend line coming down over the last few months. So yeah, so I will just read out the recommendations in terms of what we're due to do. But so review the corporate risk register in respect to the risks in the reports and consider the controls and mitigations in place to manage these risks, which I think we've done. Consider whether the committee needs any further information to be assured of the appropriate management of the corporate risks. I think we're all happy on that. Yeah? There we go. Super great. Thank you, Caroline. So we're now on to item 10, which is the adoption of the LGA Model Council Code of Conduct, which Amanda will present.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's my report, which is report number 10 at page 119 of your bundle. And what I'll be asking you to do at the end of presenting this paper is to review the LGA Model Council Code of Conduct with a minor addition that we've made at Appendix 1 and a separate arrangements for dealing with complaints against members at Appendix 2. So I'll be asking you to recommend adoption of those two documents, but to make that recommendation to the Fire Authority itself, because it's the full Fire Authority that should agree to the adoption of those documents. And that Fire Authority meeting is due to take place on the 4th of October. So if I just briefly cover the background, so at paragraph 3.1 on page 120 of your bundle, I explained that we had the independently commissioned governance review, which all members considered at an extraordinary Fire Authority meeting on the 25th of April. The Fire Authority accepted all 12 recommendations of that governance review, and that included recommendation 8, and that was that the current members' code of conduct should be updated, and that would then fully reflect the new LGA model councillor code of conduct and associated guidance. Following that recommendation, I did make inquiries with all your unitary authorities. I'm pleased to report that 3 of the 4, so just excluding Bristol City Council, have already adopted this code with 2 small amendments. So we're following the majority, basically. And I think Bristol are already planning to do so once they revert to the old committee system after the mayor who's currently in place. So if I quickly take you through key parts of the key considerations. So 5.1, the LGA issued their new code of conduct, which is now a 17-page document back in December 1920, but they have now updated that twice. So in many ways, by delaying our adoption of it, we've taken advantage of those amendments. So it's last amended on the 17th of May. And it includes these words: the code is a template for local authorities to adopt in whole and or with amendments to take account of local circumstances. So they don't impose it on you. You choose which bits you like, effectively, and whether you want to add new bits to it. The code will only ever apply as you're acting in your capacity as a councillor, and at 5.3 I set out the different sections of the code. So you've got a standards of conduct section, 1 to 8, disclosure of interests, which you're required to register in section 9, and section 10 deals with gifts and hospitality. So when I made inquiries with your UAs, 2 of the councils, so Bath and North East Somerset and South Gloucestershire, said, yes, we've adopted the code, but we did make a minor amendment, which was that we required members to consider the advice provided to them by the statutory officers, effectively. So the Chief Finance Officer, your statutory finance officer, but also your monitoring officer and clerk, myself. So we discussed this at a members' briefing offline, and it was felt that that was a sensible amendment. It was just common sense, really. So I have included that in the code, and you'll see it Appendix 1, and if you turn to page 131 of the bundle, in Appendix 1, you'll see a new clause 8B called consideration of advice. So it's not that you have to follow the advice of statutory officers, you just simply need to consider that advice. And if you're going to depart from the advice, give reasons for that departure. So the other thing that I noticed, that when I reviewed our current code, which is a very short document, only 2.5 pages long, it included something called arrangements for dealing with complaints. Now that needed to be created as a separate document and provided an opportunity for me to look at best practice. So you've now got at Appendix 2 a standalone document setting out those arrangements. So that's what will happen if someone, a member of the public, contacts me and says I'm unhappy about a councillor's conduct. I then follow the procedure set out in those arrangements. The arrangements contain 2 annexes. Annex A is a complaint form which will be put online, and you will see I've put a blank in the document saying insert link, so there will be a link to that form. And Annex B is the procedure for any hearing of this committee. So you would form a subcommittee for any code of conduct matters. The only final point to state is that the LGA says don't just rubber stamp this, you need to be trained on it. So that's common sense, isn't it? So I have already arranged that with Baines to save a bit of money. We're sharing the costs. So at 5.6 you'll see that I've arranged 3 dates. Now please members, I do not expect anyone to attend 3 times. We've literally done that so that we can accommodate everybody's diaries. So Monday the 30th of October is an in-person event, and we've each provided locations for these. Friday the 10th of November is another in-person event, and Wednesday the 15th is an evening online event. So hopefully that accommodates everybody's diaries. So please don't accept all 3 invitations, just accept 1, and I will be a smiling face there with the presenter, Bethan Evans, who's very good, who will give you thorough training about this. The law It's straightforward. The Localism Act 2011 says we have to have one, we have to have a code. So this is the updated code. So unless you've got any questions, I'll close there, and then hopefully we can recommend this for adoption to the Fire Authority. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay. So any votes against? Any abstentions? Votes for? There we go.
Thank you.
Okay, item 11, which is the performance report, the current financial year to July 23, which is Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning again, councillors and colleagues. So in front of you, you've got our performance report for the first 4 months of the current financial year. So it's from April through to the end of July. What we've done in there is trying to refocus the report in front of you to look at the areas of underperformance which we're currently experiencing. The good thing about those, if I refer you to Appendix 1, which is our scorecard, you'll see the majority of the metrics that we measure are currently showing as green. So there are a few areas of underperformance, but not too many. So the performance on the whole is generally good. So Appendix 1 is the scorecard, which shows all of our corporate measures, and Appendix 2 in your paper shows a selection of the same measures in a more tabular and graphic format in the format of our war charts, which are presented and published at each station and also sent out to members, but the information is the same on both. The other thing just draw your attention to is our annual performance report for last financial year has been prepared and published, and that's available on our website. And I'd ask you, if you can, to spare a moment to have a look at it, because I think it's quite a good way of presenting the public a picture about what we do as an authority, as a fire service, and what our achievements in trying to reduce risk and building a safer community and a stronger service. So if you do have a chance, the link is there to have a look at that report. Okay, so as I say, what we've done is we're highlighting very much the areas of underperformance. We consider these at our service leadership team, and what we ask the metric owner, so the owner of that risk with regard to that metric, is just to look at it and make a recommendation about whether they're tolerating the additional risk because we're off target, or whether they wish to treat it. And for each one of those, we've got a recommendation from the metric owner about whether they're tolerating the risk, and if so, the reason for it, or whether they wish to treat the risk, and then putting the information about what it is they're planning to do to treat the risk. And what we'd be asking you today to do is just to agree whether you, or to discuss and approve the recommendations from each of those metric owners. So what we also do is we report our performance metrics against our 7 key objectives, which are prevention, protection, response, resilience, improving our service, investing in our staff, and our transformation programme. The first area of underperformance is with regard to 2 of our prevention targets, where we're off target for 2 of the indicators with regard to deliberate fires. And those are deliberate primary fires, which loosely means it's a fire in a building or a vehicle that was fit for use before it was set light to, where we've considered to be the cause was deliberate. And both of those are off target, and I won't read it out to you, but you've got some information there from the metric owner, which is the area manager for response, and is recommending currently that we tolerate but monitor the risk. Okay, so what I'll do is, I hope you've had a chance to read that. So if I just go through the remaining ones, and then we open up for any questions with regard to that and seek your agreement of that at the end. So the second one where we're off target is with regard also to prevention, but is with regard to completing of home fire safety visits and educational packages. So our area manager prevention has given some information on there and is recommended treating the risk. And basically what we're doing is we're reinvigorating our referral mechanisms for partner agencies, which is the primary way of which we get referrals for home fire safety visits and for educational visits, to improve the volume that we're getting, which will help us to improve and get back onto target with the volume of those that we're undertaking. Okay. The third one is regard to protection and is regard to processing of licensing applications and also audits. Both of those are just off target, and the area manager for protection and I should say prevention and protection, so apologies for that, but has said that we are treating the risk, and what we're planning to do is we're continuing to recruit and train staff, and we're confident that by the end of the year that will be in place to allow us to meet those targets. Okay. The next one is regard to improving our service and is about our reduction in carbon emissions with our overarching objective to be zero or carbon neutral by 2030. So it's a 10-year target from 2020 to 2030, and the idea is by the end of that we'll be carbon neutral. You can see from the scorecard that we were off target, and with our current target for this year, because it's the fourth year of it, of reducing by 40%, we're only reporting a reduction of 19.7% in carbon emissions. But there's some information that's been given there by our environmental manager that just explains some of the intricacies of the certification of this. It means that we're looking that we should be able to recalculate this, and we are confident that we'll be back on target once that certification is in place and we've recalculated the amount of carbon usage. Okay, and the final one is regard to investing in our staff and is about our completion of personal development reviews for our staff, and we've got a target of having 95% of these to be in target. And for those of you who are not aware, our target is an individual one for each member of staff to say from the date of their last development review, the next one needs to be done within 12 months. So if it's no more than 12 months old, it's in target. If it's more than 12 months old, it's out of target. At the time of preparing this paper, we were slightly off target with 89% being in date. I'd like to assure members that we have improved since then. I've been checking the data regularly, and we are an upwards trajectory, so we are improving. And we've got some information there that basically says about some of the problems we're having with the legacy system that we were using for these reviews, that mean we're having to maintain most of them now on a paper-based system, which does make the maintenance of them slightly more difficult because managers are not able to use digital forms to check whether they're in date, but has to keep paper records. Not really an excuse, but that's the nature of it, and we're also confident that our new system that we've purchased for completing personal development reviews will shortly be in place, and by next financial year we'll be doing them all on a digital basis again, which will allow us to get this back onto track. Okay, so I'd like to pause there if I can and open it up to any questions.
Andrew.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simon. Excellent report, and I love the graphics. Really useful. Just regarding the prevention and the deliberate fires in vehicles and buildings. So at the moment, the current position is to tolerate but moderate. Is that what you said? That's what I wrote down anyway. But I was just wondering, at what point might action be needed? So are there figures in mind? I think actually this is now going too high. We need to take action.
Yes, I mean, the numbers, as the area manager said, do fluctuate up and down, but we have certainly seen at the start of this year some increases. When we look back historically, the figures are around about what we'd be expecting. And the other thing I'd like to say about that is we do benchmark these against other fire and rescue services that are most similar to us, and that information is shown on the scorecard in the right-hand columns. There are fewer things that we can benchmark. It used to be that there were, back in the days, that the best value performance indicators and then the national indicators, there were more national metrics that fire and rescue services had to measure, and because they were national, we could benchmark them more easily. Since more localism, fire and rescue services, there are no national indicators, so a lot of them measure different things from the way we continue to measure them, which means that we can no longer benchmark as effectively. But yes, you're right, it's something that we're keeping our eye on. There isn't, if you like, an absolute figure, it's more of a feel, but there is certainly work that we could done. And I think, Steve, you have some information about some of the initiatives that we're looking to put in place with regard to try and reduce some of these.
Yeah, it's very much, as Simon said, around the trends and the comparisons to previous years, we're quite often playing catch-up, I suppose, with people that are setting deliberate fires. We have our community safety intervention packages that members have been briefed on before, whether it be school intervention packages or teams going round to specific particular community groups. But some examples of when we identify trends in specific areas, for example, there was a hotspot, if you like, within Keynsham, a particular area in Keynsham that we work with PCSOs locally to get some waste, oil barrels and the like removed, and that quite quickly reduced the number of incidents in the Keynsham area. And another partnership, if you like, is in the Western area with a team called Local One. So that's a multi-agency approach that come together to look at antisocial behaviour, safeguarding issues, vulnerabilities and the like. So they've been working again on some hotspot areas, which again has reduced the number of incidences. So in part, in relation to deliberate fires, it can be reactive, but identify the hotspots and then be proactive in the prevention activities with partners. That's how we approach it.
The other thing I just wanted to add to that, Ben, is though there is a target for it and we are off target, if you look at the actual numbers involved, the numbers are quite small. So it is not a considerable risk within our community, but it's obviously something we still would like to try and drive down, because every fire that we can try and prevent is a signal of reduction of risk, but the numbers are still small.
Thank you, Simon. Any other questions? Nope. So the recommendation was to discuss and approve the recommendation. So is everyone happy to approve? Yeah. Okay, which takes us on to item 12, which is the date of the next meeting, which is Thursday, the 7th of December at 10:30 at headquarters. So see you all then. Thank you.